All right. Good morning, everybody. This is our last Agronomy trainings here. You guys can make sure to mute your line there. I'll mute it. All right. So last of our agronomy trainings this week, we're going to cover, or this year here. As a reminder, you can always go back and look at all of the other videos that Darren and I have put together for these trainings by going onto YouTube and looking up the Iowa Winfield United channel. Okay, we post all of the videos there. Unfortunately, you won't be able to get CCA credits for that because we don't have it set up that way, but you can go back and at least look and see any one that you may have missed. Okay, now today we're going to focus on drift and deposition aids, mixing, and clean out. And I am going to spend a fair amount of time more so on the drift and deposition piece and then on the mixing piece, because I know that we had some struggles this past year with mixing. So I want to make sure to spend some time going through some of the key things that we want to do with mixing to avoid some of the issues that we had last year. Okay, but to start, we want to start out with drift and deposition aids. One thing that kind of muddles up the space, everybody assumes that all drift and deposition aids do the same thing. They actually don't. They work very differently. There's two main categories. Okay, there's going to be what I call the spray droplet modifiers or the thickeners. Now, spray droplet modifiers like Interlock, like MasterLock, anything in that lock category, they're generally going to be more of an oil-based chemistry, and they work very, very differently than the thickeners or viscosity modifiers. Okay, another one in that category in the spray droplet modifiers would also be AccuDrop. AccuDrop's a little bit different in the fact that it's not oil-based, it's actually surfactant-based. Okay, so that one makes that one a little bit unique. Overall, they perform very similarly. Okay, this is just looking at all of the different curves. And for those of you guys that haven't looked at these before, I know it looks kind of confusing, but bear with me here. If you look at water alone is in the orange category here. So what we're looking at here is the density of distribution of the particle size. We got our particle size along the bottom. You got your driftable fines are using anything less than basically 100. In this case, it's going to be 100 microns, but usually we go out to 150 because that's where the EPA classifies. I think they actually do it at 141 microns is considered a driftable fine, but realistically, we bump it right up to 150. And anything less than 150 microns is considered a driftable fine. And guys, here's the thing. We cannot lose these driftable fines, okay, because they are a really important part of our spray volume. In addition, what ends up happening, there's three things that can actually happen to these driftable fines. Okay, one, they can blow off target. Two, they evaporate before they hit the target, which back in our herbicide section, you might remember we discussed that once a droplet dries, you're not going to get any more uptake from that herbicide. Okay, so once it dries and evaporates, it's not going to do any good. The third thing that can happen is it'll just settle down right on the top of the canopy, which is fine. You'll get some activity out of it. But when we look at spraying weeds, when we look at getting insects and diseases, we need to get that chemistry down into the crop canopy in order to get good coverage. Okay, so we have just water here with this orange line. Then what's interesting is when we add Roundup Power Max, and this is true of a lot of different chemistries, guys. When we add Roundup Power Max, notice how our driftable fines increase and it lengthens out what we call the span or the total the total width of that bar. So you'll notice that we have a lot tighter bar with just water as compared to water plus Roundup. Okay, now with a drift and deposition aid, when we add a spray droplet modifier, we take that green line there and we tighten that up. Okay, we tighten the whole thing up and make it much more consistent in droplet size. We also dramatically decrease driftable fines, and that's what we want. Okay, but what's even more important is that we're decreasing the overall span and making the droplet sizes more consistent. So this is with that pink line would be your spray droplet modifiers. So things like Interlock, AccuDrop, MasterLock, all of those things tighten up that span, prevent these very small droplets, but in addition, it also prevents the very large droplets. So you get much more consistent droplet sizes. And you'll see that that is in fact the highest bar on this chart. You'd get the most consistent droplet size out of having that spray droplet modifier in the tank. Okay, so that's one of our drift and deposition aids. The other one would be like a polymer or a guar. Okay, so think of something like an on target. Okay, what on target does is it actually thickens up the solution. Okay, and by thickening up the solution, it causes that droplet and those droplets coming out of that nozzle to stay together longer, which makes larger droplet sizes. Okay, works very good as a drift aid. However, you'll notice that it shifts that entire curve over to the right. What that's indicating is that you're getting a lot larger droplets on average, and you can see that over here in our microns. Okay, so spray droplets are measured in microns, and when you start looking at our droplet size here, with water we had 470, Roundup Power Max 422. So you can see Roundup Power Max does actually, and a lot of our Roundups, I don't mean to pick on Roundup Power Max. This is true of any glyphosate, Liberty. There's a lot of different things that will increase our driftable fines when we add them to the spray tank. So Roundup Power Max here, when we add our spray droplet modifier, you'll notice that we don't drastically increase our droplet size here. It comes up a little bit, but basically it's back up to where the water was. Whereas you compare when you go to a polymer or guar, now all of a sudden we're at 630 microns. Now you might look at this and go, well, you know, that's what, 150, give or take microns. Well, big deal, Tyler. Well, it is a big deal because every time you cut your droplet size in half, volumetrically, you're going to get 8 times as many droplets. That's where our extra coverage is coming from. Okay, so although drift and deposition, or these polymers and guars can be very good at reducing driftable fines, especially with mixes where Extendamax, for example, or Ingenia or Tavium are in them, they don't necessarily lend the best to coverage. Okay, and so that's where outside of the Dicamba acre, we always recommend going with the spray droplet modifiers, the AccuDrops, the Interlocks, the MasterLocks, PowerLocks, all of those type of adjuvants, because we get more consistent droplet sizes while still cutting driftable fines in almost half. Okay. Another issue that we can have, oh, look, Darren, I finally got my videos to work. So that's a good start here this morning. When you start looking at these different drift and deposition aids, you can see how they start to work. By the way, this is very similar to what we just saw on that previous slide, right? Water, Roundup Power Max, spray droplet modifier, and guar. That's the exact same thing. So here's our water. Here's what happens when we add herbicide alone. You can see our driftable fines do increase. Okay, then when we add in Interlock, we dramatically decrease driftable fines, make that droplet size more consistent, but you'll also notice that we don't dramatically increase our droplet size. And then finally, this polymer or guar, the thickener or viscosity modifier, basically what that's doing is it's thickening up that solution, makes it thicker. So as it comes out of the nozzle, notice how long it takes to break that droplet apart. You'll see that the longer that it takes to break that droplet apart, the larger the droplet size. Okay, which works okay, but the problem is, look at how big these droplets are down here compared to over here. And in the end, especially with these air induction nozzles, I still don't think you get quite the control out of this herbicide plus polymer as you do with the Interlock, mainly because of the coverage issue. Another issue that we do run into with the guars and polyacrylamides is that they do on air induction nozzles, so this is a true AI, they tend to narrow up our droplet or our overall fan width. Okay, so these are supposed to be 110-degree nozzles. If you compare herbicide alone to the herbicide plus polymer, you'll notice that our spray width coming out of that nozzle actually narrows up. And so with that, that can lead to some other issues as well. Okay, so we got to be very, very cautious on that. That's why with, for example, on target, we have very specific nozzle recommendations with that particular nozzle. All right, so let's talk a little bit about thickeners. Again, what it's doing is it's holding that sheet together for a longer period of time. And I love this video because it shows it very well. Okay, so here's just straight Dicamba. You'll notice right as it's coming out of that TTI nozzle, that sheet is immediately breaking up. It's perforating. Okay, the quicker this happens coming out of a nozzle, the smaller the droplet size will be. If you compare that to on target over here, you'll notice that it's taken clear down to here before we start seeing that sheet start to perforate. And that's why we get larger droplet size and less driftable fines with on target. Okay, and you can see that pretty well in some of the data here. Basically, we're cutting the driftable fines down in about half as compared to Ingenia or XtendiMax alone. Okay, now there are some other issues that we do have to consider when we're talking about a guar or polyacrylamide. Okay, and part of it, the reason we look so deeply into this is because it just doesn't take a lot of Dicamba moving off target to cause issues with driftable or with off target movement, right? And after the first couple of years of spraying Dicamba on soybeans, we still saw a fair amount of drift, and we weren't exactly sure why. So we went back and we started looking in the lab at how these processes are measured. So this is the standard. If you guys can see this video playing on the left here, this is how we measure driftable fines going through the spray table here, or the spray chamber. What you'll notice is the nozzle is set perpendicular and it sprays through a laser, which measures these droplets. We call this our wind tunnel. And really, guys, the wind tunnel, people think of this huge wind and we're actually measuring the driftable fines off the wind. That's not actually what the wind is there for. The wind is there to move the driftable fines off of the beam here so that we don't count them twice. Okay, so we spray perpendicular to the laser and the laser measures all these individual droplets. Okay, well, this is fine, but this is not how a sprayer works in the real world. Okay, so with a standard measurement, this is what our nozzles look like. You can see that perfect sheet forming right here. Okay, and ideally in a test scenario, this is what we're looking for. However, we're finding that this is not what happens in the real world, because if you have a crosswind or if you have a wind from the direction of travel, what ends up happening is this sheet right here will actually catch in the wind and will break up before it comes out of that nozzle. Okay, and if you think about it, it's just like a sail. It catches that sail, and basically what ends up happening is it forms what we refer to as bags. I like to call them more of like a bubble, because that's exactly what happens. Is basically the air catches in that sheet, forms this bubble, and when that bubble bursts, you get a lot of driftable fines. And you can see that dramatically here. Okay, so through the years with Dicamba, we're starting to learn more and more. And up in River Falls with our wind tunnel, we're starting to develop some new and have developed some new methods for testing this. Okay, so here we did the exact same measurement, but now we have a crosswind. Okay, and you'll notice now all of a sudden that sheet is breaking up before it should and causing more driftable fines. If we zoom in here, you can see that we got these bags or these bubbles starting to form right here. Those will end up bursting and causing these small little driftable fines that cause problems. Okay, so if we compare the standard testing over here on the left to the crosswind or any kind of wind during application, and guys, this doesn't just have to be a wind that's natural in the field, because of course we always spray Dicamba under 10-mile-an-hour wind, right? No issues there. Okay, one thing you have to consider is that sprayer is always moving forward. You can go up to 15 miles per hour with Dicamba, right? Okay, so now all of a sudden you have a 15-mile-an-hour wind at all times, just based on the fact that you're moving forward. Okay, and so this is what we're starting to find is causing some issues with more driftable fines. Not that On Target doesn't do a good job, it just, because it thickens up that solution so much, it does cause issues with the bag rupturing and causing driftable fines. Okay, so one of the ways we did figure out how to prevent this is actually to use 2 ounces of Interlock with that. Now you might be thinking, "God, Tyler, I'm already adding 4 products. Why do I want to add 1 more product?" Well, the reason why is because we do cut down on driftable fines dramatically, and I don't want this thing moving off target. Okay, you can see it cuts down basically with a DRA, we're down 42% on driftable fines. When we add in that extra 2 ounces of Interlock, we end up getting down to 60% driftable fines. Okay, here's another study. This is actually where we took it out in the field and we measured the downwind amount of Dicamba that moved off the target. With On Target, we saw a 27% reduction. With On Target plus Interlock, it was 87%. So pretty significant. Okay, again, though, we ask, well, God, we got to add 1 more product. This is part of the reason, actually, this is the major reason why Winfield United is actually introducing a new product to overcome this. We're actually referring to it as Ultralock. One of the reasons we're referring to it as Ultralock is because it will serve as a DRA, but it actually works pretty good as a spray droplet modifier when you compare it to Interlock. Some of you guys may have been out at the answer plots this summer when we took the red dye and we sprayed it over paper. It actually looks very similar to Interlock. It's a little bit bigger on the droplet size, but it does look very, very similar to Interlock, but yet it still qualifies as a DRA. Okay, and this is the reason why we brought this out. Okay, when you look at the percent fine reductions, here's On Target, and this is the use rate here. Okay, so here's On Target fine reductions. Here's that Ultralock fine reductions with that. Okay, in addition, it doesn't dramatically increase. It still increases the droplet size, but it doesn't dramatically increase the droplet size like what On Target does. Okay, so this is why you'll see us really start pushing towards Ultralock for the Dicamba mix. We're going to start with that more in the Dicamba mix, but as we get more comfort around that product, it might start to be kind of that one-all, the product that can be used across all of our different herbicide applications. Okay, but first let's start with Dicamba. Dicamba applications, we'll start to try different mixes with other herbicides as well. Not that I'm worried about it mixing necessarily. It's more I just want to make sure that the droplet size is there. It looks like it's going to be there, but I want to make sure that we're still getting good coverage. In addition, another major advantage that Ultralock gives over Interlock or the on target is when you pour it out of a jar or a jug, you'll notice that on target tends to be really, really tough to pour out of a jar. Okay, you can see it's still in there. It took 50 seconds to pour this on target out of the jar into this beaker. Whereas with Ultralock, which this is the experimental name, but Ultralock only took 15 seconds to pour out of that jar. Okay, so it pours more like an oil than it does a thickener or viscosity modifier. And that's the advantage that you have with that. So here's just some Driftable Fines things. Again, it is a little bit bigger than the Interlock, and that's why I want to walk before we run with this product, but it does do a good job of maintaining droplet size. You can see our area coverage here. Does do a nice job of getting a good coverage with that. Another advantage, it does work over more nozzles and pressures than what the on target did. With that thickener viscosity modifier, the issue that we always ran into was that it thickened it up so much that sometimes it would decrease the fan width coming out of that nozzle. The Ultralock does show some pretty good signs of working with, for example, all of our TTI nozzles and actually our URs and DR nozzles. I guess the DR wasn't tested, but the UR nozzles from Wilger. So these are kind of the two major nozzles that we use. And so that's a really, really good sign. Okay. As far as spray droplet modifiers, our main one is going to be Interlock. Okay, Interlock's kind of the base for most of that. Then we have a few other ones that are kind of offshoots. So if you think of Interlock as being that main one, it's oil-based. Okay, now you might think, well, God, is that going to heat up the solution? No, guys, Interlock realistically, especially at the use rate that you're using it, Interlock is not a good oil. Okay, so it really, really doesn't heat things up much at all. Okay, now will it a little bit? Maybe a little bit, but not much at all, guys. And so you won't really see much difference there from it being oil-based. The other ones that fit in this category would be something like an AccuDrop. Okay, AccuDrop's a little different in the fact that it is surfactant-based rather than oil-based. Okay, and so just two different flavors there. We got a lot of data on Interlock. AccuDrop's one of those that we brought out mainly because we could. It works really well, works very similar to Interlock. But as far as if you've been using Interlock, I'd continue to use Interlock. If you've been using AccuDrop, I'd continue to use AccuDrop. Both of them perform almost identically in the spray chamber. Okay. You can see here's Interlock. This is Interlock with Enlist 1. Now, one thing I will tell you guys is with Interlock or with Enlist 1 alone, really Interlock did not show much advantage to putting in the Interlock in with Enlist 1. Okay, so my recommendation, if you're just using Enlist One, which I really doubt you're just using Enlist One, but if you are, my recommendation is you don't actually need the interlock. However, when you start adding in Liberty, when you start adding in Section 3 with Superb, when you start adding in Symbol Release, Charger Basic, Warrant, any of these chemistries, that's when you need to add in Interlock, because it cuts down the driftable fines by almost half, with which was what we're showing in this study here. Okay, so Enlist One on its own, you're fine. You don't actually need Interlock in that tank mix. When you're adding in anything, any other tank mix partner with that, you need to have Interlock in the tank to prevent some of that off-target movement. Okay. In addition, it does provide better coverage. Okay. Now, a few other offshoots, MasterLock. So MasterLock is a premix of Interlock plus a surfactant. Okay. Really, we focus on it for a fungicide application. You can really see why we get better coverage throughout this canopy. Watch as the water comes through here versus MasterLock. Heck, you still got a fog over here, and look at all these driftable fines just hanging up in the air compared to over here. Okay, that's the key that you get with MasterLock. Not only are you getting the interlock, which allows for better penetration, better coverage, you're also getting that surfactant, which helps that droplet spread out on that leaf and helps you get better overall coverage with that. Okay. We also have a product called PowerLock. Okay, and PowerLock is a surfactant mixed with Interlock. Okay, much like MasterLock is, the downside to PowerLock is PowerLock contains nonylphenol ethoxylate, or NPE, which can cause arrested ear. Okay, so really MasterLock came out to replace PowerLock. Now, could you use PowerLock on soybeans? Sure. Could you use it as a herbicide application? Sure, but usually we're getting our surfactant load from something else. So realistically, I would, if you are going to position some PowerLock, I would do it on soybeans. I would steer away from corn, especially corn that isn't tasseled, or even if you have, for example, a field that's partially tasseled and you're going to go out and spray that, I would not use PowerLock. With MasterLock, I would use that any day. Okay, MasterLock does not cause arrested ear. We have shown that over many, many years. Okay, it does allow us to get a lot better coverage. Okay, and that's what's key. This is actually something Darren, you did, boy, was that 2 years ago, maybe? I don't remember, but either way, he sent this to me, and I thought this really told a good story about what MasterLock in the tank's actually doing. So over here, we have water, and we have our top of our canopy, the mid part of our canopy, and the bottom part of our canopy. You can see with just water, we get a majority of our spray on the very top of the plant, and we actually have a quite a few driftable fines after that. Okay, you actually lose quite a bit because your total coverage is 27.3%. With Gradual N, now we put Gradual N because we were hearing rumblings out in the countryside that, hey, if you put in nitrogen, it's a much heavier product. It carries the droplets down through the canopy, and we don't need a drifter deposition aid if we have Gradual N in the tank. Okay, and although you can see there's definitely some truth to that, you can see that we do get better coverage down deeper in the canopy. We actually get slightly less, and this is probably not statistical, but slightly less overall coverage as compared to the MasterLock, which now all of a sudden we are getting at least 11 to 12% more of the chemistry on that plant because we're able to keep that droplet accelerating down into that canopy, you're getting enough coverage down deeper in the canopy to get really, really good control. Okay, so you compare that to water, you're basically at 12% additional coverage. Compared to the gradual end, you're at 12% as well. Okay, and think of what 12% extra fungicide is going to do for you. And this is a similar study, showed the very same thing. If you add up all of these 60, this would be 68. When you add up these, you're looking at about 75% coverage. So it does make a big difference on our overall coverage out in the field. And by the way, guys, this does lead to a yield increase. Okay, now this is across, if you read down here, we're at basically 5 years, 14 studies, 8 states. On average, comparing fungicide alone versus fungicide with MasterLock, we ended up at 5.7 bushels per acre. So by getting more down to the canopy, getting better coverage, we are able to pick up on increase or a good yield increase. Now, this is just looking at Iowa's. Oh, I guess this is 2019 data. I have Iowa somewhere. If you guys are interested in just Iowa's, give me a call and I'll send it out. Here's our untreated check. So this is without a fungicide. V10 applications, you can see 236 with MasterLock, 237 at R1. Here's without MasterLock. Okay, it was about a 6 bushel difference here at V10, which, by the way, I get a lot of questions too. Well, heck, I'm going at V10. Why do I need MasterLock? You still need to get coverage down in the canopy. And you can see that here is about 6 bushels, even at V10. Here's R1. We're looking at about 4 bushels there. Okay, and again, one of the advantages it does give you as well is it does not contribute to arrested ear. So you can put this on at any time in corn. Here is, actually this is preference. We had about 60% of the ears were arrested in this particular study, whereas with the MasterLock, we had basically 0. Now, if you go out there, guys, and you start looking for arrested ear, you are going to find 0.5% to 1% of the ears are going to be arrested, whether you treat them or not. That's just the nature of things. The key is MasterLock does not contribute to additional arrested ear symptomology here. All right, so that covers our drift and deposition piece. The next thing I want to talk about is mixing. Okay, and the biggest thing is we want to prevent things like this. So when you think about mixing, we always go back to the Wales and Dales method. Okay, and it's not perfect, but it gets us close. So Wales or Dales, we want our wettable powders, water dispersible granules, dry flowables, and suspension concentrates in first. Okay, now I might change this around a little bit, just depending on the situation. For example, if you're using a liquid water conditioner, so Class Act NG, Class Act Ridian, I like to have those in the tank first. Okay, and I'll explain why in just a little bit. Okay, next thing we want to agitate, and I put in parentheses mild. Okay, one of the things, and I'm going to be sending out a tech bulletin here soon. I think I sent it over to Darren last night. He's going to take a look at it and make sure I didn't make too many errors. But basically, I wrote a tech bulletin on mixing. And one of the key things with mixing, a lot of applicators and farmers in general, when they start seeing problems in the tank, they bump up the agitation, right? Well, a lot of times when you start looking at our SC formulations, when you start looking at our some of our liquid formulations, our suspension formulations, those type of formulations, the more that you agitate, the more they break down, and sometimes the more the problem, that we have. Okay, so agitation, we want to go mild there because we don't want to necessarily break down that formulation. We don't want to cause more issues. And guys, one of the things that we often see with the agitation sign, the earlier that you get that into the tank, the more agitation actually ends up occurring. So think about it this way. As you're filling the sprayer, as you're filling that tender truck, if you only have 100 gallons of water in there and you got the agitation going, that 100 gallons of water is going to go through that pump a whole lot more times than if you had, let's say, 400 gallons of water in there. Okay, and if you look at it, it's not even so much that, hey, 100 gallons will go 4 times more through the pump than 400 gallons. It's actually a logarithmic scale. Okay, and that might be part of the issues that we see with some mixing, is that if you don't wait to throw some of those products in the tank, you are aggressively agitating. I don't care how slow you have that agitation going, you're going to be aggressively agitating those mixes. Okay, now for a water conditioner, doesn't matter. Throw that in there, it'll be fine. For something like a liquid atrazine, that's where we have troubles. And I think that's part of the reason why we saw such a major issue with some of the mixing. We got in a hurry. And in general, you throw everything in the tank as it's going in there because you got to get in by the time it fills up the end. What ends up happening is you send it through that pump so many times and you break down that formulation. Okay, the next one is going to be our liquid chemicals, so things like glyphosate, things like Liberty, 2,4-D, Dicamba, those things. And we're going to then put in our emulsifiable concentrates, or ECs. Guys, these are the products that when you put it in the tank, it forms this milky suspension. Okay, Darren showed you that last week when he was showing the how an oil works, right? If you put just regular oil in there, it floats to the top. With an emulsifiable concentrate, when you dump that in there, it clouds throughout the entire jar, right? And so that's what that emulsifiable concentrate is. That needs to go in then. And then finish up with surfactants, oils, and drift control agents. Now, again, there's a few caveats here. For example, surfactants, we've always put them in the end, mainly because of the fact that that's just where it fit. Okay, but realistically, if you're looking at surfactants, guys, if you're looking at them to help mix, because surfactants actually can help with mixing, I would put them in first. Okay, and that's part of what I recommend in this tech bulletin. I am going to send out that tech bulletin via the text message as soon as I can here, so that you guys have that. Okay. This surfactants, again, put that in towards the front for mixing. One of the major reasons why, guys, is because it has two polar ends. Okay, one of the ends really likes water. One of the ends really likes oil. Okay, and so what ends up happening is the tail of that surfactant that loves oil will end up surrounding an oil particle in the spray solution, and the water loving head will end up then being in contact directly with water, allowing it to suspend in that water without causing issues. Okay. Now, I've been getting a lot of calls, especially last year, around Halix GT. Okay, Halix GT, great agronomic product. However, it can have some issues with mixing. Okay, so keys with Halix GT: more water is better. Adding an extra quart per 100 of surfactant first, is going to be key. Guys, with Halix or Acuron GT, I don't care whether either one of the two, it's going to be very, very similar. Okay, you really need 2 quarts of surfactant. So if you're using dry AMS, I would bump this up to 2 quarts per 100. If you're using 5 quarts of Class Act, you just need 1 quart of preference. Okay, and the reason why is because for whatever reason, when you're mixing that with atrazine, atrazine doesn't necessarily have the best mixing qualities with Halix, and that's where we come into some issues. Extra surfactant can help you get around some of this. Okay, so if you're using 5 quarts per 100 of Class Act, add an extra quart per 100 of preference. Now, I've gotten some questions. Well, why not just bump up this rate to 10 quarts? Because that'll give you the 2 quarts of surfactant. For whatever reason, I think it has to do with the amount of AMS in the solution. By doing that, it doesn't solve the issues. Okay, you need a higher load of surfactant when you compare it to the AMS load in there. And I don't care whether you're using dry AMS, whether you're using other water conditioners, guys. The key is, because I've done a ton of jar tests, and guys, dry AMS will cause just as many problems as Class Act, unfortunately. I've done a lot of jar tests to show that. With this, that 2 quarts of surfactant is key to get that in solution, and keeping that AMS rate down is going to be key as well. So in this case, you're getting, with the 5 quarts, you're getting 4.25 pounds of AMS per 100 gallons. Okay. Liquid atrazine is one of those that's going to cause more issues. If you want to avoid issues, actually dry atrazine does not cause issues with Halix GT. Okay, now we can use liquid atrazine, just make sure you have that 2 quarts of preference. Okay, and this is just showing the mix order, Halix GT, and then finally Interlock. Okay, so here we have, oh, I didn't realize they were coming in individually. 12 gallons per acre, 5 quarts per 100 Class Act, 1 pint of atrazine, 3.6 pints of Halix, and 4 fluid ounces of Interlock. You can see the problems that we're having. Okay, now, like I said, as you increase your water, you decrease the problem. So here's 15 gallons per acre with the same mix. Here's 20 gallons per acre with the same mix. Okay, pretty clean, right? Another way of doing this is, here's 12 gallons per acre again with 1 quart per 100 of preference plus 5 quarts of Class Act, a pint of atrazine. So the same thing, but we're adding an extra quart of surfactant, and that will solve the issues that you're having with the Halix GT and atrazine combinations. Okay. Some other mixing, here's tank mix recommendations for mixing with On Target. Okay. Follows that Wales and Dales method again. Here's the tank mixing combinations with Enlist Duo. And really, guys, Enlist Duo, Extend, haven't had a whole lot of mixing problems with those. We just put this together mainly to just help, you know, because you're putting so many different products in the tank. What goes in first? When does it go in? So those are going to be key with that. With the On Target in particular, you do want to have that in right after the water conditioner to allow it to fully hydrolyze, to fully mix within that tank mix. Okay, so those are the key mixing order deals.
Hey,
with
Tyler.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Colton here. Question with the Halix. If I've got a customer that's set up to run dry AMS, is our recommendation then 2 quarts of preference per 100?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes. And guys, I'm not sure what happened this year to last year, but for whatever reason last year, not every customer had it, but this past year was really, really bad for mixing. I think part of it was the fact that we had so many days in a row that were really, really good for spraying, right? And we didn't have to stop and clean out and do all that. And so I think we ran into some issues around stuff just built up over time, because guys, it's usually not in that first tank mix that causes the problem, usually not in the second, usually not in the third. It's that fifth and sixth tank mix that causes issues with Halix GTs. So, and guys, I'm not bashing Halix GT or Acuron GT, very, very good agronomic products. And by the way, products that have glyphosate in it, they're going to be key this year. I just want to make sure we have a good experience with them. So I'm going to be sending this out later. I'm having Darren go through and just making sure that we don't have any spelling errors, and just making sure that agronomically also the information's correct. But this is a really good tech bulletin to talk about mixing considerations with Halix and Acuron. So here's just 4 key ideas. So the first would be increasing water. You can see these are the same things I just showed you: 12, 15, and 20 gallons per acre. Agitation, don't overly agitate things. Here's just showing the surfactant and how it helps to bridge the gap between some of these oils and surfactants, or oils and waters here. And then using an extra quart of preference, so the 2 quarts per 100 of surfactant is going to dramatically improve your tank mix to the point where I don't think you're going to have any issues whatsoever. Okay, so it can be made to work very, very well agronomically. When you look at all of the different things that are in Acuron GT and Halix GT, makes absolute sense, especially when you start looking at water hemp control. But we just have to be a little cautious around some of the mixing issues that we can have. All right, good. Any other questions? The final section I wanted to spend a little time on was around sprayer cleanout, because this is one of those that I don't think we necessarily do a great job at sometimes, and I've seen a lot of issues with stuff coming out later. Okay, so the first things first, you want to make sure that you go through it and you take off all of the spray lines. Okay, of course, empty the sprayer out first. Okay, and then clean out and take out all of the filters. Okay, and the reason I want to take out the filters and wash them separately is because as we do this tank mix or tank rinsing, you're going to do a 3-step tank rinse. You're going to rinse with water, then you're going to rinse with tank cleaner, then you're going to rinse with water again. If there are any particles left on this filter, we're going to basically just recontaminate that boom. Okay, so pull all of those off first. Okay, clean them and then put them back on. Another thing to note, especially if you guys have newer applicators that have newer sprayers, a lot of the newer sprayers that come with like an 80 mesh or even a 100 mesh screen. If you read the label for atrazine, Halix, a lot of these SC formulations, you cannot have any finer screen than a 50 mesh screen. And remember that basically that number, all it's measuring is the amount of holes per square inch. Okay, so the larger the number, the finer the screen. And so you cannot have any finer screen than 50 mesh screen because of the fact that you need to allow space for that mixture to go through the screen. Okay, so usually what I'll run with that, if you have multiple inline, I'll run like a 30 mesh on your main manifold, and then out on the boom lines, I'll run a 50 mesh there. Okay, so those are going to be key there. Clean those out first. We also want to make sure that we remove all the caps off the end. So we're flushing clear through the end, because these dead ends in the sprayer is where a lot of this stuff gets caught up. Okay. Now, overall, a lot of the newer sprayers are coming with basically no dead ends on them. That's great. Just make sure that they're completely cleaned out. I know, like, for example, the Case IH, you can flip a valve yet and run water through there. It's always best to do that just to make sure nothing gets hung up. With some of the John Deere and Hagie ones, it just kind of ends right there at the sprayer. You might just want to open them up a little bit and just check to make sure there's nothing forming on those dead ends. Okay. Another thing, we want to make sure that we remove the caps off of these sprayers. So some of the sprayers, for example, a lot of the aim command systems on the Case IH sprayers, a lot of the Hagies as well have a second nozzle body behind here that's meant for high flow nitrogen. This is where I've seen a lot of crap get caught up as well. So you want to make sure that when you're cleaning this part out, that you not only do you clean out this turret, but you also take that back nozzle off, or that back plug, and clean that out as well. Okay, because if you don't, a lot of stuff can get caught up in this cap. And every time then that you stop for the night or to fill up, this stuff can bleed back in the line. And then, for example, if you're going from corn to beans, you could have dead beans for the next 10 feet. Maybe even if you leave it overnight, even 100 feet. Okay, so the key is we got to get that cleaned out. I also recommend removing the gasket here, just make sure nothing's built up there. And I recommend removing the turret, which basically you just pull this, and you don't have to do this on every one. It's just to make sure that there's nothing getting caught up in the turret itself. So remove that turret by taking this little clasp off, and then this whole turret slides off. Okay, so just check a couple to make sure nothing's being built up in that turret itself. Basically, guys, what we want to do is we want to make sure that nothing is getting caught up. So you want to do all of this before you do any kind of rinsing. Okay, then you're going to do your 3-step process. So you're going to rinse with water, then you're going to rinse with tank cleaner, then you're going to rinse with water again. Okay, and a lot of these newer sprayers do have a very good mixing protocol, or sorry, clean out protocol already in them. So if you follow the instructions on the screen, for example, of John Deere, I know they have a really good mixing, or sorry, a really good clean out program. You can just follow the instructions on the screen. It'll get that sprayer cleaned out properly. Okay. The biggest thing we don't want to have happen is this type of stuff. Okay. Or this type of stuff. So get those cleaned out properly. If you have a clogged or worn nozzle, or you need to clean a tip, make sure that you are not doing anything with a sharp object. I always like using a CO2 canister to kind of blow those nozzles out if they're plugged. And then always, if you have nozzle screens, which anymore, not many of us are running nozzle screens, but if you do, make sure you're cleaning out those, and make sure you check the tank as well. Okay, if you have this kind of buildup, you definitely want to get that completely out of the tank so that we don't have issues. Now, I often get calls and, well, God, this stuff is just stuck to the side of the tank. How do I get it out? My first recommendation, fill that tank with tank cleaner and leave it overnight. So many times, guys, we try to get in a hurry. We put the tank cleaner in, we spray it off, and hey, let's get going. Honestly, guys, it'd be better to fill that sprayer up with the tank cleaner and leave it overnight. Let it work on this and then dissolve it. Now, you might not get everything, but you'll get a majority of it, and you'll soften it up enough that you can go in there with a pressure washer and just quick power wash that inside of that sprayer. Okay, again, if you're having this time and time again, if you increase the amount of surfactant in that solution, you can cut this down to almost nothing. Okay. Always make sure that you locate all the screens and the dead ends to prevent that kind of issue from occurring. Okay. So triple rinse, first with water, second with water plus tank cleaner, and third with water again. Remember, it takes as little as 0.0005 ounces per acre of water or of dicamba to see visual damage on soybeans. Guys, that's roughly a thimble full of dicamba in a 1,200 gallon spray tank. Okay. It only takes 0.04 ounces per acre to have a yield loss. So we definitely want to make sure that we're getting the sprayer cleaned out. So with that, do you guys have any questions?